last week, we told you how the baby Moses was found in the bulrushes. Do you remember? The Pharaoh's daughter took pity on Moses and decided to bring him up in the royal palace. Later on in the programme, we'll be telling you what happened to Moses. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Pharaoh, the one who ordered for all the baby Israelite boys to be drowned. Now, we're not certain which Pharaoh it was, but most people think that it was the Pharaoh Ramesses. Ramesses the Great. That's his statue there. He looks enormous, doesn't he? All pharaohs were important people, but Ramesses thought that he was the most important of the lot. And in order to try and prove it, he had huge statues of himself put up all over Egypt. He had pictures painted which showed him forcing his enemies down onto their knees. And he had carvings done on the walls which showed him crushing them underfoot. And here are some of the prisoners he's captured, with their arms tied behind their backs. And a rope round their necks. And can you see that figure up there by Ramesses' knee? That's one of his wives. She looks a lot smaller than he does because he didn't think she was as important as he was. Between his legs is one of his children. She looks even smaller, doesn't she? That's because Ramesses thought children were even less important. Altogether, Ramesses had 198 children and 13 wives. So one way and another, he was quite a family man.
What would Ramesses really have looked like? Well, Si has been dressing up to show you.
He'd have been about my size, certainly no bigger. And in addition to a white linen kilt, he'd have worn a jeweled collar and a false beard, like this.
All the pharaohs wore false beards. Even the female pharaohs did. And they also wore royal headdresses. There we are. Mm-hmm. The pharaoh used to carry two things like these, called a crook and a flail. They were to show that he was the king.
He also wore eye makeup. In Egypt, it wasn't just the women who wore makeup. They all did. It was partly for decoration and partly to protect their eyes against infection.
While he's finishing off his eyes, we'll show you how you can dress up. Well, first of all, you'll need some white material. Perhaps a towel or an old sheet will do. And then you can make yourself a wig out of black sugar paper. First, you cut out the shape, like that when you open it up. And then you stick on a band of decorated paper around the top here, and it's fastened at the back, and then it should just fit onto Reza's head beautifully. There you are, Reza. A real Egyptian you are. After that, you could do a jewel collar. Cut out a round piece of paper, like that. And then you cut out a piece in the center here, which would be just right for your neck. And then all you have to do is decorate it. There we are. There's one that we've already decorated for you. Mary and Darren here, they've almost finished theirs. They're using felt-tip pens and gold shiny paper. Oh, that's very good, Mary. And Michael and Caroline here, they've made themselves necklaces with lucky charms on. Do you remember those from last week? Well, this one is the Egyptian sign of life, and this one is the Eye of Horus. They were supposed to bring you luck if you wore them. How are you doing, Pharaoh?
Just finished. How do I look?
Magnificent.
Ramesses the Great, or as he would have put it, Ramesses the Greatest. For between you and me, he was a terrible swank.
Come on, children. Let's help the Pharaoh sing his song, shall we?
What's my name, Egyptians?
Ramesses!
Am I the greatest?
Yes, yes, yes!
I'm Ramesses, better do what I say. I'm Ramesses, I'm the one to obey. I'm Ramesses, get on your knees. I'm the top man in the land.
I'm Ramesses and I'm nobody's fool. I'm Ramesses and the general rule is down in your knees to Ramesses. I'm the top man in the land. Who's the one you cheer? Ramesses. Say it loud and clear. Ramesses. Who's the one you die for? Who's the one you cry for? Ramesses. Ramesses. Who's got all the brain? Ramesses. Say it once again. Ramesses. Who's a living wonder? Who will bring you plunder? Ramesses. Ramesses. I'm Ramesses. I'm a very big shot, and I'll say it again just in case you forgot. I'm Ramesses. Get down on your knees. I'm the top man in the land. I'm Ramesses, and I'm really unique. But Ramesses has a poisonous streak. So down on your knees to Ramesses. I'm the top man in the land. I'm your top man, I'm your top man. I'm your God and your king, I'm your everything. Yes, I am the man you must fear, 'cause I'm the boss around here.
What a show-off. I think Ramesses was the most conceited man that ever lived. But let's forget about him for the moment and get back to Moses. As you remember from last week, when Moses was a few years old, he was taken back to the palace to be brought up. And with 198 children of his own, Ramesses was hardly going to notice one extra. Well, the years went by and Moses started to grow up. By the time he was 7 years old, he was almost certainly doing what you're doing, going to school and learning to read and write. Mind you, things weren't quite the same. For a start, they'd all have sat on the floor. That's because there was very little wood in Egypt, so they didn't have much in the way of furniture and chairs. They didn't have any desks either. Instead, they rested their writing things on their laps, while their teacher, or scribe as he was called, gave them exercises to do.
Write in your tablets, the Nile is a very long river. Yes, it's me being the scribe this time. I've come down in the world. Paper in those days was like this, made out of papyrus reeds that grew by the Nile. It was very expensive, so school children would mostly write on wooden tablets or bits of broken pottery. And this is what they wrote with. They didn't have pens or pencils. They made pens out of pieces of dried reed. And I'm going to use my pen to write Egyptian letters on my piece of papyrus paper. I'm writing my name. G A A N T. Cy Grant.
And here's Ramesses' name, with an oval frame round it, to show that he's a pharaoh. It's funny sort of writing, isn't it? It's a bit like a secret code. Letters like these are called hieroglyphs, and many of these hieroglyphs are based on things that the Egyptians could see around them in the fields and on the river. One letter was shaped like a plough. Another was like rippling water. Another was like a bird. Another was round, like the sun. The Egyptians had lots and lots of those letters, over 800 of them in fact, so it would have taken Moses an awful long time to learn to read and write. How many letters are there in the English alphabet? You try counting after the programme. I think you'll find that you're quite glad you go to school in Britain and not in ancient Egypt.
Right, children, put your pens away.
When the Egyptians weren't writing, they'd sometimes keep their pens behind their ears, just like you do, perhaps. But mostly, they'd keep them in writing cases like this one. There was a slot here for the pens, and 2 little cakes of ink, red and black ink, which had to be moistened, of course, before they were used. And the owner's name was written on the case, in hieroglyphs. You can see writing cases like these ones on lots of the old wall paintings. Here are the scribes out in the fields. They're watching the farm labourers at work, and they keep a careful eye on how much corn is being harvested and note it all down in their writing cases. If you like, you can make your own writing case. Just stick a strip of card onto a narrow box, just like that one. There we are. And then you paint on the cakes of ink, and then you write your own name in Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's a short Egyptian alphabet in the teacher's notes, so your teacher will be able to help you with that.
Okay, children, that's all for this morning. Away you go.
Egyptian children had to work hard for their teachers, but they had fun and games as well. Often they'd spend the day on the Nile, just as I'm doing. Sometimes they would go fishing, and sometimes they would go hunting in the marshes for duck and wildfowl. The whole family would go along, children and all. They even used to take the cat with them to help frighten the birds out of the rushes. After a good day in the marshes, they would take their catch home and have it for supper. There's one of the cooks, plucking a fowl before cooking it. Apart from hunting and fishing, there were the buildings to visit. By Moses' time, there were already plenty of things to see, like the Sphinx and the pyramids. The Sphinx is a strange statue with the head of a human and the body of a lion. No one knows quite why it was put up, but the pyramids were built as tombs. Each one was the tomb of a dead pharaoh. The pyramids and the Sphinx were both finished hundreds of years before Moses was born, but with Ramesses as pharaoh, there were new temples and monuments going up all the time.
We don't know for certain what happened to Moses when he was a young lad, but I expect that his teacher would sometimes have taken him and the other children to see the latest building works, a bit like a school visit. And when they all got back, the teacher would have made them write about what they'd seen. Now, what would Moses have written? Let's imagine.
Today we watched some slaves working for the Pharaoh. Our teacher said they were Israelites. Some of them were sawing at blocks of stone, and some were dragging the blocks off to the building site. It was very hot, but the Israelites were made to work hard. There were men with whips who hit them if they stopped working. A lot of the time they sang songs to keep their spirits up. I felt sorry for the Israelites.
Labour gangs sing songs all over the world. It helps to make the work seem a little easier. Perhaps the Israelite song went something like this.
Heave, 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 men of Israel, heave at the rope and tighten your grip. Heave, 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 men of Israel, those who slacken will be tasting the whip. You slave all day in the blazing sun, an Israelite's work is never done. Heave, heave, heave at the rope till you drop. Dig,
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 dig, men of Israel, dig with your shovel till your muscles crack. Dig,
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 dig, men of Israel, dig at the earth till you're breaking your back. You slave all day in the blazing sun, an Israelite's work is never done. Dig,
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 dig at the earth till you drop.
Oh, well, next week we'll tell you some more about Ramesses and his building works.
And then we'll tell you what happened when Moses found out that he was not an Egyptian, but an Israelite. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Come on, back to work, slaves!
Saw men of Israel, saw in the quarry at the blocks of stone. Saw men of Israel, saw till your fingers are worn to the bone. Sweat, men of Israel, sweat at the arms with the mud and straw. Sweat, men of Israel, this is the Pharaoh of Egypt's law. Sweat, men of Israel.